Ben, that is to say, is the very model of the modern major humanist. He's studied classics as well as Afro-Latin festival culture. He knows his way around a military census, but he has eagerly collaborated with anthropologists and musicologists in pursuit of the very deepest humane and humanistic questions about the nature of being human and about how race and caste have gotten in the way of the recognition of humaneness in others. His student's bio describes his advocacy for the humanities to, quote, give depth to our days, end quote, and also to, quote, cultivate lives of meaning and dignity and pursue justice. I anticipate we'll hear those themes, as well as his deep familiarity with world history and current trends in higher ed in this presidential address, for which I now cede the floor. Please join me in thanking Ben for an extraordinary year of service to the AHA and to higher ed more generally, and in welcoming him to the stage to speak on reflections on our times, higher ed in focus. Thank you.
Wow. Sue, thank you so much for that incredible and generous introduction. And I want to thank all of you, fellow members of the AHA. It has been an absolute honor to be your president this year and to be able to present to you this evening. As I begin my address, I am mindful of two things. First, I am one of the few AHA presidents to have also simultaneously been a university president. And second, I do believe that I am the first to have been president of a historically black college and university. And given what we've been enduring in higher education lately, I thought it appropriate tonight to lean in on these roles, in addition to my experience as a historian, to reflect on our times, to offer hope, as well as some possible paths that we might take to improve the road ahead. My talk tonight has three parts. I will offer a proposal, I will look at last year in higher ed, and I will end with 9 recommendations for us to begin the new year. So let me begin. And let me start with the proposal. Don't look now, but I'm inclined to believe that we live in an age that we might properly call the massification of higher education. Now, this is an era in which a new and emerging skills economy will require more higher order thinking, as well as cognitive abilities that are best achieved by pursuing a post-secondary degree. This is an age of more research, more investment, more students, more impact. And at the moment, I confess this is a fragile age. There are pitfalls that endanger its course. I'll talk about some of this tonight, but I also believe that we as historians have a unique opportunity to shape this era. And in fact, my proposal tonight is that I dare call our need to rise to this occasion as our collective obligation. Now, I'll understand if you don't agree with me. First, that we're in such an age. I get it. From all the current policies, the assaults, the challenges to our enterprise, you have very good reason to be skeptical. And compound that with the fact that in September, 7 out of 10 Americans surveyed by the Pew Research Center reported that they believe that U.S. higher education is headed in the wrong direction. But if we pull back for a minute, if you let me make the case, and if we look at the sector from a global perspective and we take stock of some of the numbers and examine some of the interesting international trend lines, maybe we'll see something different. Now, first, among the strongest indicators of higher education's massification is research productivity. And from 2012 to 2022, the number of research articles produced worldwide increased by nearly 60%, with output in the emerging economies growing feverishly. Well over 3.3 million articles are produced annually, of course, tilted toward the sciences. It is true that there has been growth in scholarly monographs, and that has been a little bit slower, but even there, more discoverability, more access enabled by technology has created a broader awareness and an incorporation of scholarly findings across multiple fields. Another metric is philanthropy. In this age of massification of higher education, philanthropy has leaped. Currently, university philanthropy is, no surprise, dominated by the United States, where nearly $60 billion is collected annually. But lately, there has been notable swelling in Canada, Britain and Ireland, Australia and New Zealand, where contributions now hover around $1 billion per region. A third metric is investment in research. And we have been witnessing over the years a surge in global research investment. There's been a rise in research expenditures, investments, to roughly $1 trillion in the year 2000 to roughly $3 trillion in 2022-2023. In other words, global research and development spending has nearly tripled in 20 years, although not all of it directed to colleges and universities. Fourth, and probably one of the most crucial indicators of higher education's massification, is enrollment growth. In 2023, there were 264 million people studying in institutions of higher learning around the world, up from 100 million in 2000. And despite our own demographic cliff in the United States, those international numbers are slated to grow substantially over the next decade. It's going to be led in part by Asia, which possesses the world's largest per capita youth population. Now, to be sure, amidst the surges, access remains unequal. Africa, in particular, with the world's largest percentage of youth, 70% of the population on the continent of Africa is under the age of 30. Africa lags woefully behind other regions in college enrollments. But it is precisely in places like this, and with investments such as the MasterCard Foundation, which is putting in well over $1 billion in really helping to close the gap in Africa, things will improve, increasing the surge of enrollments even more. So what does all this mean? What does massification mean? And what does it mean for my proposal to you? Well, as the world increasingly rushes into the corridors of higher education, as the advances of research multiply, as added investments into universities and research are made, there are countless positive implications. Quite simply, we can be encouraged that despite what the world may look like today, if the broader macro trends continue, our future will feature a vastly more knowledgeable world, armed with greater domains of expertise and with greater critical skills. There will be more informed citizens. There will be positive impacts for the global workforce. But perhaps more importantly, in this moment, the seeds are being sown for an intellectual and knowledge revolution of the likes that we've never seen before, if only we can maintain course. So I return to my proposal. We live in an age of higher education's massification. We are obliged to shape it uniquely as historians. But let's take a look at last year and reflect on our times. There are concerns that the potentially favorable outcomes of massification are subject to peril. There are already clear signs of cracks in the system. Across the board, universities and their faculties over the past 2 years have reported growing concerns over reductions in academic freedom. Last year, 34 countries reported such declines due to a global rise in anti-pluralist forces. Current times have also been economically unsettling for much of the global higher education sector. A combination of factors, such as reduced government funding in many countries, increased educational costs and fees, demographic downturns, susceptibility to changes in international enrollment patterns, shifting state policies, overbuilt universities, all of this has contributed to great volatility in global higher education. Last year, nearly half of British universities were in deficit. Stagnant government funds in Japan prompted some institutions to seek alternative sources of capital. Dutch, French, Canadian universities faced layoffs because of steep budget cuts, while strikes hit Argentina as university staff pressed for a living wage. Universities in Hong Kong had to dip into their reserves just to remain solvent, while India's Excellence Initiative for developing world-class universities was cut. Over half of South Korea's universities proposed significant fee increases to cope with financial troubles, and institutions in Scotland and New Zealand struggled to maintain razor-thin margins. In Australia, universities received the least amount of government support proportional to their income than ever before. And on the African continent, a lack of financial transparency at many institutions, alongside poor record keeping, hindered institutional credibility and harmed access to vital global funding. In short, given global experiences to date, we can expect that as massification takes shape, there will be bumps in the road and backtracking as we press to move forward. Now, here in the United States, we're living through an era of higher education's massification during a very special period of our own. What some have termed the U.S. Academy's Gilded Age. The American post-secondary educational system still shines as one of the world's crown jewels in terms of innovation, impact, and prestige. A great deal of the growth in the world's research output and financial investment has come from America, and we attract between 1 to 1.2 million foreign students a year. That's about a seventh of all international students who travel around the globe. But there are also deep concerns within our system that have been brewing for some time. After experiencing a jolt of expansionism from the 1950s through the 1970s, American higher education has become more stratified today, with growing rifts emerging between the elite institutions and the rest of the academy. There has been increased polarization, labor inequities, public pressure, and marketization. Our operating models have been stressed for years, with few levers to pull for relief. As a former university president, and provost, and dean, I can attest to the pain that is caused by these headaches. Virtually any U.S. university leader, at least since the early 2000s, has been addressing an acute set of nagging issues: navigating the impact of emergent technologies, wrestling with anti-intellectualism and the eclipsing of the humanities amidst the rise of STEM, addressing internationalization, confronting leadership and governance challenges, really trying to improve teaching and learning, fostering student success, and of course, managing the enrollment and demographic cliff. Last year alone, 2/3 of American colleges and universities reported experiencing some form of financial stress, precipitating widespread hiring and budget freezes. Harvard, the most well-endowed university in the world, ran over a $113 million deficit in fiscal year 2025. Broad financial challenges at universities create internal stresses for all of its members. During the past decade, there has been a 1.5% drop in inflation-adjusted wages for faculty. And since 2020, there has been a 10% drop in tenure-track faculty salaries. During this same period, the number of contingent faculty have grown. And amidst budget freezes, cuts, undergraduate and graduate student aid has shrunk. Concerns over faculty job security have risen. Faculty research support has diminished, and effective curricular planning has been made difficult by the hiring challenges and staffing uncertainties that we live with. Of course, we've grappled with and we've survived intense pressures before in our sector. American higher education has always adapted in the face of challenges, and that's contrary to the popular imagination. The Great Recession of 2008, COVID-19, these were recent times of stressful strain. But in 2008, the economic decline actually spurred increases in college enrollments as the workforce retooled to prepare for future employment prospects. And during COVID-19, colleges received significant assistance as the government directed over $76 billion through its Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund, HERF, to help institutions support their students and to prevent mass layoffs, to supply technology for online learning, and to preserve enrollments. Looking closer at the more recent challenges, it is questionable, actually, whether our institutions actually ever truly recovered from either COVID or the Great Recession. After COVID-19, the removal of those HERF funds exposed deep budget vulnerabilities on many campuses. At the same time, it can be argued that the financial crisis of 2008 exacerbated fragilities in our finances that we continue to address today. State funding did not completely recover. Tuition dependency intensified. Deferred maintenance increased almost everywhere, and structural deficits deepened across the board. In the meantime, as we wrestled to surmount these specific financial problems, public rancor began growing over soaring tuition and admission scandals. And this began throwing the very value and integrity of a post-secondary degree into question. So, and we all know this, an atmosphere emerged that encouraged yet more critiques of our sector, critiques with roots in the culture wars of the 1980s, namely that American higher education had become too ideologically rigid, culturally dangerous, out of touch with the mainstream. And some of the more biting criticisms indicted us for enjoying too much largesse at the taxpayer's expense through inflated cost structures. In hindsight, it is easy to see a slow but steady public relations and political backlash forming, even amidst some of the greatest scholarly accomplishments, research advances, and medical discoveries of our times. What we now face is the outcome of these mounting pressures, the sheer multiplicity of forces that we confront. When we confront these at once, they actually meet the definition of something the literature has called a polycrisis. This was a term that was coined at the turn of the millennium to describe a confluence of numerous, complex, existential challenges that are born both simultaneously and at the same time in succession. Amid a polycrisis, the collective impact of its forces is much greater than the sum of its parts. I would argue that our polycrisis today has some distinct features to it. We are navigating turbulent times in a very unique political environment, where the pace of activity has been furiously quick and exhaustive. And in the name of reform, there's a deliberate underlying method deployed to target the most susceptible areas of higher education: research funding and student aid. The pocketbook-driven, pain point-focused approach has not only commanded higher education's full attention, but the strategy has swiftly sought to halt certain forms of university activities to effectuate immediate landscape changes or to broker landscape-changing deals. In the first 75 days of the 119th Congress, 30 education bills were introduced, touching everything from student visas to university endowments, student loans, to political activities on campus. Simultaneously, proposals were made to reduce staff and reorganize a host of major federal agencies, including the NIH and the NSF, which immediately affected grant management and funding allocations everywhere. A proposed 50% cut to the staff of the Department of Education quickly impacted the disbursement of approximately $120 billion of student aid and the management of $1.7 trillion in student debt, and the ability to sustain longitudinal data needed to preserve the nation's student assistance architecture. Combined with the stream of executive orders and freezes and revocations of university research grants, demands for certain institutions to place departments under receivership, and even the October 2025 invitation for universities to engage in a compact with the administration to align admissions policies and hiring and endowment use, all of this has signaled a new era in federally directed university oversight. Intensified federal scrutiny and supervision has been followed up with related oversight at the state level. Now, this is particularly evidenced in the divisive concepts laws that have been passed in states like Alabama, Texas, and Florida, and Mississippi. And these examine and restrict the subjects that professors can teach. Some have wondered whether the pressure that the sector has been feeling is actually beginning to reveal the true nature of the academy, showing the extent to which the autonomy of universities has always been conditional, subject to being shaped by external systems like politics and law. Alternately, some have also wondered if what we face today is something that's truly new, that requires a different set of actions than in the past. However one answers this question, there is a simple fact that remains. Again, all previous eras of American higher education have possessed regulatory oversight. But prior to now, there has tended to be a consensus on a basic principle. As Adam Sitzi recently observed, and I quote here, "Universities, like churches and courts, are considered counter-majoritarian institutions. They can continue to serve the common good only insofar as they remain protected from direct control by state and political majorities." End quote. Through previous legislative eras, this principle has been a through line. It has been a bedrock that has contributed to making America's educational system an enviable asset in the world's eyes. Today, elements of that principle are being abandoned and threatened, thereby rupturing critical aspects of our current educational system. And those results are shaking the sector, producing at least 3 higher education ruptures, which, again, I'm just repeating what many of us have lived through over the last year. These 3 ruptures, and there are more, but I focus on these 3, are internationalization, DEI, and research. Let's first look at the unsettling impact on the rupture on the international student and faculty flows to the United States. For some time, internationalization has been a crucial strategy to help fund American colleges and universities, bringing in over $40 billion of revenue in 2023-2024 alone. However, interest in studying in the United States has dropped precipitously, falling by nearly half in 2025. Internationalization has also traditionally been a major talent source and vehicle for universities, as well as a vital means of fueling the greater American workforce. 43% of STEM doctoral students are on student visas. Most have remained after graduation, helping both academia and industry. But federally imposed travel bans, visa restrictions, visa fees, and heightened entry screening, and rising concerns that the punitive measures being taken against immigrants lack due process, all of this has started thwarting foreign talent. Additionally, internationalization has been pivotal in helping make critical advances in research on questions that demand an international perspective and that solve issues that are global in nature. But select funding freezes, such as for USAID projects, that has disrupted some of the key international partnerships, especially in Africa and Asia. While there's a great deal more that can be said here, let me now turn to DEI. In January 2025, an executive order directed federal agencies to investigate colleges and universities with endowments exceeding $1 billion to dismantle DEI activities, claiming that such initiatives promote sex and race-based preferences. Now, while the teaching of Native American history has since been upheld and support for HBCUs was vigorously maintained, The new DEI landscape has stripped funding from Hispanic-serving institutions and minority-serving institutions. Moreover, in the months following the executive order, a series of grants deemed ideologically dangerous were identified, followed by widespread research project suspensions for violations of Title VI transgressions promoting race-conscious programs. A series of legal challenges emerged, particularly with regard to how the new DEI decrees impinge on academic freedom and the mission of universities to effectively serve the totality of their student bodies. Others have questioned the ambiguities and contradictions in the legislation, to the point that some accreditors have sought some flexibility for universities as they attempt to abide by these emergent laws. There's been additional concern that overall the climate created by the anti-DEI movement is unraveling decades of civil rights progress while actually jeopardizing the goal of race equity in America. Now, even greater ruptures to the nation's research environment took place last year. Between January and the end of May, the administration canceled over $10 billion in grants, citing waste, citing DEI, and ideological bias in awards that were bestowed by the NSF, the NIH, NASA, among others. Many grants were reinstated in June. Meanwhile, in May, the president submitted his congressional budget request, which gave clear indicators of his funding priorities. And within this request, proposed cuts to research agencies ran deep. Proposed cuts to the NIH, the NSF, NIST, NASA, and NEA ranged between 40 and 100%. And although proposals still needed to be further negotiated and reconciled with Congress, the administration's announcement made an emphatic statement regarding its intent to reverse the previous 4 years of stable or elevated funding to the government's primary research engines. Also, there were proposed changes that were launched in February to curb the federal indirect cost recovery rate of the NIH and other agencies, and capping those university reimbursements to 15%. Now, while this effort was hotly contested with lawsuits and legal challenges, the move sparked efforts by teams of faculty and administrators to begin work on reforming the existing F&A model. In hindsight, the volume, the intensity, the choppiness of the various legislative fits, the starts, the reversals that were endured over last year, those have taken a toll. Even if certain measures were ultimately retracted, the research pauses and the delays have indelibly hurt some long-term projects. Now, without a doubt, the potential long-term consequences of current research disruptions, they will further erode America's already slipping lead in the international research arena, providing opportunities for competitors to rapidly gain ground. We are already aware now how America is lagging behind China in the number of publications produced in engineering, computer science, and mathematics. France also now leads the world in international academic collaborations, while America still has 32 of the top 32 out of 55 top subject areas in academic subject areas. There are aggressive strategic investments that are being made that are reaping large dividends in China, in Hong Kong, in South Korea, in Singapore, in South Africa, in Egypt, and in other parts of the Middle East. But perhaps more significantly, the tenor of the legislative tactics that are currently aimed at higher education have signaled a rupture to the framework under which research has been conducted in the United States since the Second World War. A lot has been written about this sacrosanct union that was forged between government and higher education to fund university-led research in exchange for scientific discoveries that will propel society, that will bring technological innovation and improve medical discoveries. The crowbars that have been taken to this pact over the past year have signaled that we need to re-examine its fundamental tenets, especially as we simultaneously navigate an era of global growth in the broader higher education sector. So where do we go from here? For us to successfully navigate these times and to elevate higher education, I believe that we need to recalibrate our work, our working relationships, and activities in more elemental ways than we have in the recent past. For starters, we must remember that within our organizations and within our colleges and universities, we have not lost certain things. For instance, we have not lost the intellectual power of the academy. We have not lost our missions. We have not lost our two most precious resources, our students and our faculty. And because of this, we have not lost our fundamental ability to harness change. In the academy, we have not lost our ability to convene and offer reflective spaces capable of modeling civic dialogue and the best of civic behavior. We must use our power to convene in order to impact internal and external audiences, to inform and to educate across ideological spectrum. Our institutions must become what Matt Vandenberg, the president of Ohio Wesleyan, has described as, quote, laboratories of reconciliation, deploying strategies of empathy and dialogue with partnerships even outside of the academy to introduce the change that we need to help depolarize the nation. Finally, I believe that there's been an important element that has been missing in the conversations that we've been having over higher education's polycrisis. Its existential nature has been so disorienting that it has been hard for us to fathom constructive avenues that we personally can take to contribute to better outcomes. Compound that with the fact that we've all been moving through our own fog, our own disillusionment, our own soul searching and questioning of mission during this moment, which serves only to further weaken our sector. With this in mind, we have an opportunity to fortify and elevate certain strengths of academia. And I will conclude by offering a 9-point agenda to help us, especially historians, to move forward constructively. For those in the audience who are graduate students or working outside of colleges and universities, I also believe that there are aspects of what I offer that may be equally useful, if not directly correlated to your experiences. Recommendation number 1, determine when resilience requires reinvention. First, in this moment, we must grapple with determining when resilience is called for and when greater reinvention is necessary. We must really candidly ask ourselves, has the terrain of higher education fundamentally changed? Or is it in the process of changing? Would we even recognize such change? And if we're able to recover lost ground as we confront our times, will higher education ever go back to the way it was? And should that be a goal? Or should we be preparing for something new? And if we are indeed preparing for reinvention, what's within our power to achieve? There's a great deal of debate on these questions. A good starting point is to ask ourselves and our institutions, what are our sacred cows? And is it time to reevaluate and assess their true value? We must be honest in our assessments to encourage truth-telling at our institutions so that we can be forward-looking to imagine and create a better future. At the same time, for us to be in positions to be successful at either resilience or reinvention, we must remember the importance of agility. Being agile and flexible enables both our capacity for positive change and resistance to harmful change. Finally, we must not fall prey to nostalgia. Over the past few months, I've heard a great deal about the proverbial better times in higher education, when shared governance was stronger, when the humanities were more revered, when the graduate student landscape was flusher. Nostalgia, of course, always reminds us of pleasant pasts. But we must not overlook the real issues from previous times that need inspection and correction. Times of stronger shared governance were oftentimes marred by stronger gender and racial biases, alongside disciplinary and rank-infused hierarchies. While the humanities may have been more vigorously may have been more vigorous previously. Closer inspection shows that even then, faculty mourned a forsaken past. I invite you to read a book by Jeffrey Galt Harpham on that subject. And I propose that if we're going to be able to refocus on higher education's need to be both resilient and reinventive, we must first need to avoid the seductive traps that nostalgia can bring to our ability to concentrate on a stronger future. Before I proceed to the remaining points this evening, I do want to take a few moments to reflect on certain models of resilience that exist in the broader academy. Many of the pressures that we've been facing here in American higher education, this is not novel outside the United States. When we look at the global landscape, we see examples from institutions across Latin America and Africa and Asia where enormous structural, political, economic, and even epistemic challenges, they haven't inhibited progress of those institutions over the long term. Numerous institutions in higher education systems have found ways to flourish in the face of challenges and constraints. Chile's universities have survived dictatorship and neoliberal restructuring to become among Latin America's top performers. In Singapore, a top world educational system emerged rapidly through intentional and careful state prioritization amid dominant party democracy and soft authoritarian political system. The Rwandan university system has shown substantial recovery and fortitude in the aftermath of the 1994 genocide. And there's more. In the United States, one particularly effective example of resilience comes from HBCUs, where their mindset and worldview has helped these institutions overcome considerable barriers. And they are a beacon of hope that we can turn to in thinking through our actions in current times. Now, HBCUs, with some exception, were born in the aftermath of the Civil War to help complete the promise of America and its democracy by uplifting slaves. And out of their doors, a strong black middle class has emerged. I have a personal connection to HBCUs through my previous job at Howard. And when I reflect back on on the time that I had the opportunity to lead Howard, there are many things that experience taught me. There's a worldview that develops. There are lessons for American higher education, and there's several themes that emerge that I would like to share. Maintaining resilience against fragility. Expecting excellence in every faculty member and student. Always striving towards those standards and holding your values dear, never losing sight of them, being full-throated partners with surrounding communities, ensuring that we're prepared to be welcoming, and remembering that every single person in an institution matters, and each contributes to the overall mission. Universities need to constantly remind our constituencies of these points on a daily basis. It creates an internal resolve that empowers a campus and can help us achieve the goals of our endeavors. John Sylvanus Wilson, who was the former president of Morehouse, warned that in higher education, it is too often the forces that are off campus that dictate what happens on campus. And he argues that this is exactly an inversion of what should be transpiring. What I've seen at HBCUs, whether it's Morehouse, Spelman, or Hampton, whether it's Prairie View, FAMU, or Tougaloo, whether it's North Carolina A&T or Tennessee State, all preach that you cannot let others define you, that you have the supreme capacity to define yourself in your own terms, no matter the circumstances, no matter what people will throw at you, no matter the hate. And such fortitude is grounded in legacy, and it is cultivated into institutions where the civil rights movement continues to live and breathe, and where its lessons are transmitted through the curriculum daily. And in fact, historian Jelani Favors, he describes this as the second curriculum. The product of these teachings is not a deepening sullenness or hate or guilt. It is not a widening of the gulf that exists between us, but it is the creation of a mindset of tolerance and a fuller appreciation of the lessons of history and a desire for greater mutual understanding across that spectrum of human difference. Students and faculty are collectively engaged in conscious projects that explicitly acknowledge that self-improvement and elevation enable you to help serve others in pursuit of shaping a better world. Now, HBCUs are they're no utopias. They are tempered in hard reality. But given their historical journey and outcomes, they offer some lessons of hope and inspiration that we can draw from on our institutional journeys by adopting some of their worldview and mindset. Number 2, and I promise to move more quickly through the remaining points. The hour draws near. Number 2 is continue your research. Our questions, our findings, and our inquiry, these are the lifeblood of the academy. And this is true across fields and subfields. Despite innumerable challenges to the integrity of our work, we must relentlessly pursue our historical inquiries and not panic. Time and time again, historical research at its best has provided the context for developing the frameworks that have improved social understanding and have helped build a more tolerant, just, and empathetic society. As NYU historian Robert Cohen has signaled, we need to continue to cultivate our work to guard against bigotry and the impact of miseducation to help our world improve. Point 3, embrace the arc of time. It is imperative that we encourage patience in our institutions, in our colleagues, and our leaders, and that we reassure our communities of the value of time. Historians, we view time as an asset, and we uniquely may be able to help chart how to use it gainfully within our institutions. Mark Putnam, who is the president of Central College in Iowa, has spoken about the need to embrace the arc of time so that we move not on reactive impulses, but on reflection and reflective actions. Initiatives often fail when the time frame to enact these actions are unrealistic. We would do well to remind our communities that iterative and recursive actions work better for accomplishing our long-term goals. And we as historians can infuse this perspective into institutional discussions, into meetings, to encourage better organizational decision-making for our long-term benefit. 4, and this is closely related to this, point 3, and that is broadly encourage a historian's mindset. I have long believed that part of the special powers that we as historians have is the ability to thrive in ambiguity, as well as to recognize patterns and successfully maneuver against chaos. We are superb at understanding the nature of change over time and recognizing when people opt to forget the past selectively or selectively remember it. I believe that our experiences in the archives, our roles as interpreters, as synthesizers, as bards of disparate events in time, this prepares us and ultimately provides us with the ability to instill an institutional calm. If one of the goals of higher education's critics is not to actually bring clarity, but to foment chaos and confusion, then historians are particularly suited for the task of navigating uncertain waters while helping others to do so as well. Lucien Besmer, who is a historian of science at Harvard, has noted that today's challenges do not demand simply data-informed decision-making or metric-driven analysis. There are limits to these approaches that can eschew historical context and its benefits. Rather, historically informed decision-making should become part of our everyday institutional arsenal. Point number 5, becoming more engaged institutional citizens. Now, as you can tell from these previous points, I really believe that we as historians, we really need to be more active in our institutions. We cannot afford to be cloistered or distant or removed. We must be engaged institutional citizens. We must find ways to bring harmony into our units, but also to connect individuals in our units with those in other units in order to build greater institutional camaraderie. And this responsibility takes several forms. I'd like to be concrete here. One is to familiarize yourself with university budgets, their intricacies, their trade-offs. I see many smiles. I'm serious. The more armed you are with this knowledge, the better you can strategize about initiatives with colleagues and engage meaningfully with the university and its shared governance structures. Now is also a good time to expand your knowledge of administration. As a dean, I confess to you all, and I see some of my colleagues from GW with me, and I remember maybe even saying this to you, Melanie, that I once believed that good administration at a college or university is much like a computer operating system. I believe that good administration was built to lurk in the background, almost imperceptible and invisible, yet constantly worrying and working feverishly to enable faculty to do their best work. Given what we're doing now, what we're going through in our polycrisis in this moment, I no longer believe that this is true. Instead, more intentional, active, constructive, and visible partnerships are needed across administration and the faculty. And universities are blessed with having a surplus of intelligence that can be directed at innumerable sets of issues. We must activate ourselves to rewire the circuitry of what it means to be a university colleague. To achieve the best results, we need to be broadly familiarized with administrative apparatuses of the university and to understand the functions of each arm in addressing the pressures we face. Point number 6, focus our priorities. Now is the time to focus our own priorities, concentrate on what really matters, and help our institutions do the same. We are tired. We are fatigued by the swirl of recent activity. We must strive not to overextend ourselves in an era of limited resources. Let's prioritize fewer tasks. Let's focus on what is most essential. We are in a period of systemic overload, and we must come to terms with the reality and find methods to slow down. Recommendation 7, build alliances. We need new alliances to help make the case for higher education. And in doing so, we need to think imaginatively about building cross-sectoral alliances. Simply put, there is room for more alliances among universities, between universities and industry, universities and school systems, universities and nonprofits, universities and professional organizations. There are potential new internal collaborations, and we must explore them all. Speaking specifically of international alliances, these may be needed now more than ever before. For years, American universities have been critical deliberative spaces for foreign universities to convene, to partner, to develop ideas, to forge community, to conduct research in ways that may have not been permissible in their home countries. Now, international universities have the opportunity to return the favor, offering related opportunities for us. Alliances also can help us turn the tide of anti-intellectualism. There are 72 million Americans holding a bachelor degree. And it is likely, we haven't confirmed this, that there is probably up to 1.5 million who hold a history degree. We need to harness the power of our alumni in order to engage them as advocates, because they can help us disseminate and validate our mission to curb disillusionment and to remind the public of our essential worth. And in building these alliances, we must be mindful that we need to meet people where they are. Elena Piper, the Vice Chancellor at the University of Technology in Sydney, recently stated that there exists a rampant complexity fatigue that is experienced by the public when it comes to trying to understand what is it that universities do? What is it that the research that's going on in university? We need to sharpen our messaging as we build these alliances and hone in on the clearest values that we all commonly share to rebuild public faith in our enterprise. Number 8, reclaim knowledge. In this moment, we have a profound obligation to our students, and we must not surrender being the center of the knowledge enterprise. As reading culture has declined, as reliance on AI has started to rise, we must claim our space and empower our students. Joel Madiri from the University of Pretoria reminds us that fearlessly nurturing language development and historical consciousness helps establish the intellectual foundations for justice and democracy. Amna Khalid and Jeffrey Aaron Snyder from Carleton further signal that now is the time to intensify how we teach about material conditions and class differentiation, while resisting ideological echo chambers and providing students with the tools that they need to interact across the ideological spectrum. Simply put, there are opportunities for us to pattern curricula to these ends, not just in history, but to encourage the work across the arts and sciences. My final point: engineer a character revolution and build better democratic citizens. We can begin here by asking, what is the responsibility of our students to society? What is our responsibility as members of a university community to one another? How do we develop our internal selves and talents, as well as those of our students, to ultimately emerge as individuals who can contribute positively to the collective good? How do we translate our talents and abilities into a fruitful civic life? How do we develop civic knowledge and civic skills that are extensions of our character? I believe that these are among the core questions that we must ask restlessly to help engineer a character revolution to strengthen our constitutional democracy. In 1947, in his essay, The Purpose of Education, Martin Luther King Jr. reminded us that, quote, intelligence plus character, that is the goal of true education. I think he was right. And what teaching character looks like, that's going to vary widely. The opportunities to connect character development with strengthening civic capacity and ability, that's going to vary as well. But beginning with working groups of faculty, campuses can begin to explore this journey in ways sensitive to the individual strengths of each individual campus. The values of the faculty and their institutions and the range of complexities inherent in their student bodies, this can be worked through. I do believe it is a journey well worth taking. As I close, a couple of months ago, I was reintroduced to a term that I had long forgotten, that I think actually encapsulate both the gravity and the levity of the moment we're living through in these times. In a 1994 episode of The Simpsons, Lisa, the middle child and oldest daughter of the Simpson family, she was talking with her dad. And Homer, of course, he was in one of his usual favorite spots. He was sitting on the couch, completely relaxed with his eyes half closed, as only Homer has, his beer gut on full display. His wife was there, Marge, and the baby, Maggie. Lisa looked up at Homer and said, "I'll do my best impression. Look on the bright side, Dad. Did you know that the Chinese use the same word for crisis as they use for opportunity?" There was a pause. Homer thought for a second. Then, as if struck by lightning, his eyes bulged, and he replied, "Yes, crisis-tunity. You're right." Well, listen, that's not quite right. And the philosophy behind the etymology is more complex, but the the idea still captures our moment. Let's leave tonight with hope. Let's leave knowing that the challenges that we face are real. But let's leave armed with the knowledge that change is ours for the making in these times, and that as colleagues and as historians, we are poised to make a greater difference for a better future ahead. I dare call this our obligation. This is my proposal tonight. Thank you.